Fire, 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 fire. Now you've heard it. Not shouted in a crowded theatre, admittedly, as I realize I seem now to have shouted it in the Hogwarts dining room. But the point is made. Everyone knows the fatuous verdict of the greatly overpraised Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who asked for an actual example of when it would be proper to limit speech or define it as an action, gave that of shouting fire in a crowded theatre. It's very often forgotten what he was doing in that case was sending to prison a group of Yiddish-speaking socialists whose literature was printed in a language most Americans couldn't read, opposing President Wilson's participation in the First World War and the dragging of the United States into this sanguinary conflict which the Yiddish-speaking socialists had fled from Russia to escape. In fact, it could be just as plausibly argued that the Yiddish-speaking socialists who were jailed by the excellent and overpraised Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes were the real firefighters, were the ones who were shouting fire when there really was fire in a very crowded theatre indeed. And who is to decide? Well, keep that question, if you would, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I hope I may say comrades and friends.
The voice you just heard, of course, was the late Christopher Hitchens, mandatory plug, subject to this book, which is out at the end of December. And I found that intro really striking for a couple of reasons. So this is the beginning. He's in Canada. He's at a debate at a university that apparently looks like Hogwarts on free speech absolutism, and it's a mixture, right? I mean, part of the reason I wanted to write about him is that, like, I have very mixed feelings about the guy that I wanted to work out, since at his best, he's very, very good. I mean, he's an amazing writer and speaker, and when he's right, there's nobody that you'd rather have making the case, which makes him equally infuriating when he's wrong. And, and if obviously the last 10 years of his life, he went to some political places that I find pretty indefensible. But you see both even in that video if you watch the whole video, because there's some there's some sketchy arguments later on, and there's there's this Islamophobic stuff at the end about when he's sort of ranking threats to these things, but that was great, and it made me think about what he might think about the CRT wars. The culture wars going on right now, and the more substantive policy wars about people allegedly teaching critical race theory in K-12 classrooms, and when he says at the end of that clip, who gets to decide, right? Who what counts as the fire and who are the firefighters? Right? When you say, oh, people shouldn't be free to shout fire, it's like, okay, well, but I mean, what actually is a fire, right? What's worth getting alarmed about it? Who gets to decide? I think these are exactly the questions that are relevant to the crusade being waged by people like Chris Rufo and the subject, the main subject of our episode tonight, James Lindsay, better known to Twitter users as @ConceptualJames, but also known to many people in state legislatures around the country as the guy who goes around giving testimony to them to push these laws against CRT. And according to the Rufos and Lindsays of the world, who should get to decide what goes on in, say, a high school history classroom is not, teachers, like history teachers themselves, but state bureaucrats with no, particular training in this, who would be enforcing vaguely written laws against teaching ominous, against teaching divisive concepts. That's the phrase it uses a lot. There's some definition of divisive concepts. We'll probably get into that later in the episode. But like whether any given comment matches their definition or not, right? Or whether any given lesson plan matches their definition or not, is contentious, right? It's not something anybody would agree on. There's lots of room for people to start self-censoring because they're afraid that if they say something that might be kind of innocuous, it might be seen as falling afoul of these standards. It might be, flying a little too close to the sun of these divisive concepts about race that you're supposed to keep out of the classroom. And ultimately, it's about firing people, and people being afraid of being fired. And so I think obviously it's unknowable, right? I mean, even when people do the what would Michael Brooks think about intra-left controversy this week, even that's unknowable. And guy's only been gone for a little over a year, but it's still a little hard to say in some cases because we'll never know. I mean, part of what was so valuable about him is that he wasn't completely predictable, and he would often come at things from angles I didn't expect, and etc. And certainly when you play this game with Christopher Hitchens, if he'd been cancer in 2011, what would he think about something that's happening in 2021? It's even harder because he had some very contradictory political views towards the end of his life, and which Hitchens you got in any given context was a little up in the air. But I think there's a chance that he would have sort of held on to his sort of pro-priest free speech, pro-open good discussion of controversial ideas positions and said, no, screw you. We can, he would have put it more colorfully, drunkenly. We would, no, I don't want some like petty McCarthyite bureaucrats, deciding, what goes on in a history classroom or who should be fired, for being too divisive. And I know, of course, a lot of times when people sort of imagine the, Hitchens living for another 10 years scenarios, they think, okay, well, look, I mean, the guy was not exactly, to put it in the terms of how people would have put it when he was still alive, was not particularly PC. He probably would have been canceled numerous times by now. I'm sure that's true. Sometimes at least some of them he would have deserved it, and other ones he wouldn't have deserved it. But I'm sure it's true. On the other hand, though, when it comes to this race stuff, I wouldn't be too quick to jump from that to the idea that he would necessarily be on the anti-woke side of any particular conversation. There's a debate that he did in late 2001, actually a few months after 9/11. So, keep in mind that, he was advocating war with Afghanistan and saying this at the same time, where he was on the pro-reparations side of the debate. And I think we have a brief clip from his argument for reparations.
There's a constant whine and drone, what I call a white whine, when this subject comes up. People say, what, you mean we'd have to go back and help the Comanches get there? You know how it goes. A rather nasty combination, actually, of self-pity and self-hatred.
And, as far as whether any of that nasty combination is on display in this particular context when people are arguing, about CRT and anti-CRT laws, You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the Patreon-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the Patreon-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.